Blood trickled down 7-year-old Zara's nose as the businessmen smirked. The entire first-class cabin froze in shock. Nobody moved, except for Jackson Miller, whose muscular frame rose slowly from seat 2A. 20 years of Navy SEAL training had prepared him for combat, but never for this. Before we dive into this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to follow more stories of justice being served. Can you believe what happens next when this decorated Navy SEAL decides enough is enough? The morning had started like any other for Tiana Williams as she guided her 7-year-old daughter Zara through the bustling Atlanta International Airport. As the chief pediatric surgeon at Grady Memorial Hospital, Tiana was accustomed to high-pressure situations. Today's flight to San Francisco wasn't for leisure. She had been invited to present her groundbreaking surgical technique at a medical conference that could save thousands of children's lives. "Mommy, will the plane go above the clouds?" Zara asked, her bright eyes wide with excitement as she clutched her beloved stuffed rabbit, Hoppy. "Yes, baby. We'll go so high you might even see angels," Tiana replied, squeezing her daughter's small hand. Despite the early hour, Tiana's phone had already buzzed several times with hospital emergencies she'd handed off to colleagues. This trip was rare quality time with Zara, who often had to share her mother with critically ill children. At the gate, a pleasant surprise awaited them. "Dr. Williams? We've upgraded you to first class based on your frequent flyer status," the gate agent announced with a smile. "Both you and your daughter." Tiana hadn't flown first class in years, always choosing to save the hospital's travel budget for equipment rather than comfort. "Thank you," she said, genuinely pleased. "That's very kind." As they boarded the aircraft, Zara bounced with each step down the jetway. "Are we going to get special cookies?" Jamal said first class has special cookies. Tiana laughed. "Maybe. But remember what we talked about on the way here?" Zara nodded solemnly. "Use my inside voice and remember my manners." "That's my girl." The first-class cabin gleamed with luxury. As Tiana settled Zara by the window in seats 2B and 2C, she noticed a man across the aisle in 2A. His athletic build and watchful eyes suggested military training, though he wore civilian clothes. He gave them a polite nod before returning to his book. The peaceful moment was shattered when a man in an expensive gray suit approached row 2. Harold Whitfield, 58 years old with silver hair and a watch that cost more than most cars, stared at his boarding pass, then at Tiana and Zara with undisguised displeasure. "I believe you're in my seat," he said coldly, despite his boarding pass clearly showing seat 2D. "Sir, I believe we're in the correct seats," Tiana replied calmly, showing her boarding pass. "We're in 2B and 2C." Harold's jaw tightened as he realized his mistake. Without apologizing, he slid into seat 2D beside them, immediately pressing the flight attendant call button. A blonde flight attendant with "Michelle" on her name tag appeared. "How can I help you, sir?" "I'd like to change seats," Harold said, not bothering to lower his voice. "I'm not comfortable with my seating arrangement." Michelle's eyes flicked briefly to Tiana and Zara. "I'm sorry, sir, but the flight is completely full today." "Surely there must be somewhere else," Harold insisted. "Perhaps someone in economy would appreciate an upgrade." "I apologize, but company policy doesn't allow seat changes after boarding without a valid reason." Michelle's smile remained fixed, but her discomfort was obvious. "Fine," Harold huffed, pulling out his laptop and creating a physical barrier between himself and Tiana. Across the aisle, Jackson Miller observed the interaction with growing interest. As a Navy SEAL with 20 years of service, he had developed a keen sense for trouble brewing. The businessman's behavior had set off warning bells. Jackson had seen that look of contempt before, in warlords and terrorists who viewed others as beneath them. The encounter reminded Jackson of his childhood friend Darnell. Growing up in rural Virginia, Jackson had witnessed how differently his black friend was treated. When they were 12, a store owner had accused Darnell of stealing, roughly grabbing his arm while ignoring Jackson, who had actually pocketed a candy bar on a dare. That injustice had shaped Jackson's worldview and eventually led him to a military career where he could stand for something greater than himself. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Harold made another comment, just loud enough to be heard. "First class certainly isn't what it used to be. They let anyone in these days, regardless of whether they belong." Tiana stiffened but focused on helping Zara with her seatbelt. Jackson noticed her hands trembling slightly as she double-checked the buckle. "Mommy, that man seems angry," Zara whispered, her voice carrying in the quiet cabin. "Shoo, it's okay, baby. Some people just wake up on the wrong side of the bed," Tiana whispered back, though her eyes reflected hurt. Once they reached cruising altitude, Michelle began the first-class beverage service. She served Harold first. "Scotch, neat," he demanded without looking up from his laptop. When Michelle reached Tiana and Zara, she smiled warmly. "What can I get for you ladies?" "Apple juice, please," Zara said excitedly. "And just water for me, thank you," Tiana added. Harold snorted. "Apple juice in first class? Ridiculous." Jackson watched as Tiana's shoulders tensed again. He had seen that protective posture countless times in war zones, a parent trying to shield their child from surrounding dangers. But this wasn't a war zone. This was a domestic flight in America. The plane suddenly hit a pocket of turbulence. The "fasten seatbelt" sign dinged on as the aircraft jerked violently. Zara's apple juice launched from her tray table, arcing perfectly through the air and landing directly on Harold's expensive suit pants and laptop. "Mommy!" Zara gasped in horror. Harold's face contorted with rage as amber liquid seeped into the light gray fabric. The cabin went silent as every passenger watched to see what would happen next. "You little brat!" Harold bellowed, slamming his laptop closed and jumping to his feet despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. Apple juice dripped from his pant leg onto his Italian leather shoes. "I'm so sorry," Tiana said immediately, reaching for the cocktail napkins. "It was the turbulence. Let me help you clean that." "Don't touch me," Harold hissed, backing away from her outstretched hand as if she carried a disease. "This is a $5,000 suit. Do you have any idea what that means?" "Of course you don't." Tiana's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Sir, it was an accident caused by turbulence. My daughter is only 7 years old." "Well, maybe if you knew how to teach your child some manners," Harold sneered, emphasizing the word "your" in a way that made its subtext clear to everyone within earshot. "But I suppose that's asking too much from certain people." The coded language hung in the air like poison. Passengers in nearby rows became intensely interested in their magazines or the clouds outside their windows. No one intervened. No one made eye contact. "Excuse me," Michelle the flight attendant said, hurrying over with a handful of napkins. "Let me help with that, sir." "This suit is ruined," Harold continued, ignoring Michelle's attempts to dab at the stain. "I have a board meeting immediately after landing. What am I supposed to do now? Show up looking like I let a child use me as a sippy cup?" Jackson Miller watched the scene unfold, his jaw tightening. The businessman was making a spectacle, but what bothered Jackson more was how the other passengers averted their eyes, pretending not to notice. It was the same enabling silence he'd witnessed in villages halfway around the world when local strongmen abused their power. Zara's bottom lip trembled as tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "Well, you did it anyway, didn't you?" Harold snapped at the child. "And now look what happened. Sir, please return to your seat." "The seatbelt sign is still illuminated," Michelle said, her voice professional but lacking any real authority. "Not until I get some assurance that I'll be compensated for this damage," Harold insisted. "That laptop might have been affected too. That's thousands of dollars of potential damage." The airline has a process for filing claims for incidents like this, Michelle explained. I can bring you the paperwork. I don't want paperwork. I want accountability, Harold said, glaring at Tiana. I want them removed from first class. Zara began to cry quietly, fat tears rolling down her cheeks as she hunched smaller in her seat, trying to disappear. Look at that. Crying now. Typical, Harold muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. That's how they always react when confronted with their own mistakes. Tiana's eyes flashed dangerously. What exactly do you mean by, they, sir? Harold smirked. I think we both know exactly what I mean. Jackson shifted in his seat, prepared to intervene if necessary. 20 years of combat experience had taught him to recognize when a situation was about to escalate beyond words. I'm really sorry about your suit, mister, Zara said suddenly, wiping her tears and reaching into her small backpack. She pulled out her beloved stuffed rabbit, Hoppy, extending it toward Harold. Maybe Hoppy can help you feel better. He always makes me feel better when I'm sad. The child's innocent gesture of peace offering hung in the air between them. For a moment, Harold seemed taken aback by the unexpected kindness. Then his face twisted with disgust. Keep your filthy toy away from me, he snarled, slapping Zara's hand away with enough force that the stuffed rabbit went flying down the aisle and the little girl fell back against her seat with a cry of pain and surprise. Don't you dare touch my daughter. Tiana said, her voice rising as she protectively wrapped an arm around Zara. Your daughter touched me with her disgusting little toy, Harold countered. I want you both moved immediately. I'm being harassed and assaulted. Michelle looked helplessly between them. Perhaps it would be easier if you and your daughter moved to another section, Dr. Williams. Just to defuse the situation. Tiana stared at Michelle in disbelief. You want US to move because he is being inappropriate and aggressive toward a child. I'm just trying to find a peaceful solution, Michelle stammered. The peaceful solution would be for this man to apologize for striking a child and using racist language, Tiana responded firmly. Racist? I never said anything racist, Harold said loudly, playing to the audience of silent passengers. This is ridiculous. They're playing the race card because their kid doesn't know how to behave in public. As the argument intensified, Jackson found himself transported back to a mission in Somalia 4 years earlier. His team had witnessed a local militia leader bullying a family, threatening them for trivial reasons. His commanding officer had ordered them not to intervene in local matters. Jackson had followed orders then, and the family's home had been burned down the next day. He still remembered the father's eyes, silently pleading for help that never came. I will not be moving, Tiana stated firmly, her professional composure returning. My daughter and I have every right to be here. We were upgraded by the airline based on my frequent flyer status, and we have done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong? Harold scoffed. Your uncontrolled child ruined my suit and potentially my laptop. Mommy, it's okay, Zara whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve. We can move. I don't mind. The pure innocence in her voice, the willingness to accommodate injustice to make peace, seemed to infuriate Harold further. His face reddened as he loomed over them. See? Even the kid knows you should move. At least she has more sense than you do. Zara turned toward him, her young face earnest. I'm really sorry about your clothes, sir. It was an ACC. Without warning, Harold's hand shot out, striking Zara across the face with enough force that her head snapped back. Blood immediately began flowing from her nose, spattering her white t-shirt with crimson dots. For one surreal moment, the entire cabin froze in shocked silence. Harold Whitfield smirked. You hit my baby. Tiana's scream shattered the cabin's horrified silence. Her hands trembled as she reached for her daughter, doctor's instincts taking over despite her shock. You hit a 7-year-old child. Blood continued to trickle from Zara's nose as the little girl sat in stunned silence, too shocked to even cry. Her wide eyes reflected confusion and betrayal, the look of a child whose understanding of the world had just been violently rewritten. "She invaded my personal space after repeatedly harassing me," Harold declared loudly, adjusting his cuffs as if he'd merely swatted an insect. "I have the right to defend myself." "Against a first grader?" An older woman from row 3 finally broke the bystander silence. "You don't know the situation," Harold snapped back. "I've been provoked and assaulted since boarding this flight. First with juice, then with that filthy toy." Michelle the flight attendant hovered nearby, her face pale. "Sir, please return to your seat. I need to report this incident to the captain. Report that this woman and her ill-behaved child have been harassing a premium customer," Harold instructed. "And find me another seat immediately." "The only seat you should be concerned about is one in a police station," Tiana said through clenched teeth as she pressed a napkin to Zara's bleeding nose. Her hands shook with a mixture of fury and fear, the primal reaction of a mother whose child had been harmed before her eyes. "Is that a threat?" Harold leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Do you have any idea who I am? I could buy and sell that hospital you work at 10 times over before lunch." "How do you know where I work?" Tiana asked, suddenly alert to a new dimension of threat. Harold smiled coldly. "Your hospital ID is hanging from your bag." Tiana Williams, Chief of Pediatric Surgery. "By tomorrow, the board will know exactly what kind of trouble you cause." The threat hung in the air between them, a reminder of how power and privilege operated in the real world, beyond the supposed equality of the law. In seat 2A, Jackson Miller flashed back to another memory. His last deployment had taken him to a classified location where he'd seen children used as pawns by those in power. He had sworn then that if he ever witnessed such abuse in civilian life, he would not stand by. 20 years of discipline kept his rage contained, but his decision was made. Zara, recovering from her initial shock, began to cry quietly. "Mommy, my face hurts. Why did he hit me?" "I said sorry." "Because he's a bad man, baby," Tiana whispered, her voice breaking. "Some people are just bad inside." "That's slander," Harold snapped. "I acted in self-defense against persistent harassment." "She's 7 years old." Tiana repeated, her voice rising. "What kind of monster hits a child?" The co-pilot emerged from the cockpit, summoned by Michelle's urgent report. "What's going on here?" he demanded, taking in the blood-stained napkins and the crying child. "This man struck my daughter across the face," Tiana stated firmly. "I want him arrested when we land." "She's exaggerating," Harold countered smoothly. "The child lunged at me with a toy after deliberately spilling juice on my suit. I merely deflected her. If anyone should be facing consequences, it's this woman for failing to control her child in a premium cabin." The co-pilot looked between them, uncertainty evident in his expression. Harold's confident delivery and expensive suit created the appearance of authority, while Tiana's emotional state made her seem less credible despite the evidence of injury. "She has a bloody nose," the co-pilot observed. "She worked herself up into a state and got a nosebleed," Harold dismissed. "Children get nosebleeds all the time." "That's not what happened." Tiana protested. "Multiple passengers saw him hit her." All eyes turned to the surrounding passengers, looking for confirmation. One by one, they lowered their gazes, suddenly fascinated by their shoes or the safety cards in their seat back pockets. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to challenge a man who radiated wealth and connections. Jackson watched this collective failure of moral courage with growing disgust. He had seen it before, the way power insulated itself through intimidation and the complicity of witnesses. He had promised himself never again. "I need everyone to calm down," the co-pilot said, clearly out of his depth. "Sir, for now, please return to your seat. We'll sort this out after landing." I will not sit next to these people, Harold insisted. I demand to be moved. Mommy, Zara whispered, her voice quavering but suddenly urgent. Hoppy is gone. Tiana looked down the aisle where the stuffed rabbit had landed after Harold had knocked it from Zara's hands. Another passenger had picked it up, but instead of returning it, had tucked it into their bag, taking advantage of the chaos. This small, additional injustice, the theft of a traumatized child's comfort item, was the final straw for Zara. She began to sob in earnest, her small body shaking with the force of her distress. I want Hoppy. The bad man made Hoppy go away. Shut that child up, Harold demanded. This is exactly why children don't belong in first class. Sir, please return to your seat, the co-pilot repeated, more firmly this time. No. Harold stood his ground. Either they go, or I go. And trust me, you don't want me to make an issue of this with your airline's executive team. I play golf with your CEO. The co-pilot hesitated, visibly calculating the professional risk of challenging a seemingly powerful passenger versus protecting a bloody child. Zara looked up at her mother, her innocent face streaked with blood and tears. It's okay, Mommy, we can move, she repeated her earlier offer, her voice small and defeated. I don't want to sit by the bad man anymore. It was this, the sound of a child learning to accommodate injustice, to make herself smaller in the face of cruelty, that finally triggered Harold's undoing. You should listen to your brat, he sneered. At least she knows her PL, Harold never finished his sentence. As Zara turned toward him once more, perhaps to apologize again despite everything, Harold's hand shot out reflexively, striking her directly in the face with a closed fist this time. Blood spurted from Zara's nose, spattering across the white headrest cover. The businessman smirked, as if satisfied to have established his dominance once and for all. The entire first-class cabin froze in collective shock. Nobody moved, except for Jackson Miller, whose muscular frame rose slowly from seat 2A. 20 years of Navy SEAL training had prepared him for combat, but never for this. In the stunned silence that followed Harold's assault, Jackson Miller moved with the controlled precision that had kept him alive through 4 combat tours. 3 seconds. That's all it took for him to cross the aisle and secure Harold in a specialized restraint hold, painful enough to immobilize but leaving no visible marks. What the hell do you think you're doing? Harold gasped, his face contorted with shock as his arm was bent at an angle that promised agony if he struggled. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? Someone who just assaulted a child in front of 20 witnesses, Jackson replied, his voice eerily calm. The quiet intensity of his tone silenced the businessman more effectively than shouting would have. Now you're going to sit down and shut up until the authorities arrive. The cabin erupted in chaotic activity. Passengers who had been studiously avoiding involvement now had their phones out, recording. Michelle frantically called for the captain while the co-pilot stood frozen, uncertain whether to help restrain Harold or order Jackson to release him. I am a decorated combat veteran restraining an active threat, Jackson announced clearly, understanding the legal importance of establishing his intentions. I will release him when law enforcement arrives. Tiana had gathered Zara into her arms, pressing a fresh cocktail napkin to her daughter's bleeding nose while whispering reassurances. Her medical training had taken over, but her hands trembled with the particular terror that only comes from seeing one's child harmed. He hit me again, Mommy, Zara sobbed, blood and tears mixing on her small face. I didn't do anything wrong. I know, baby. I know, Tiana whispered, shooting a grateful glance toward Jackson. You did nothing wrong. That man is going to be in big trouble. The captain emerged from the cockpit, taking in the scene with the practiced calm of someone accustomed to handling emergencies. I need an explanation. Now. This passenger struck a child, Jackson stated flatly. Twice. The second time with a closed fist. I am restraining him for the safety of everyone on board. He's lying. Harold protested, though he had grown noticeably paler. This is assault. I'll sue this entire airline into bankruptcy. The captain's gaze fell on Zara's bloodied face, then hardened. We're diverting to Denver. I'm declaring this a level 2 security situation. You can't be serious, Harold spluttered. For a misunderstanding with a child? Do you realize what this diversion will cost your airline? Less than my conscience would cost me if I did nothing, the captain replied coldly before turning to Jackson. Sir, can you maintain control of this passenger until we land? Jackson nodded once. With pleasure. As the captain returned to the cockpit to coordinate the emergency landing, Harold attempted to regain control of the narrative. This is ridiculous. I was defending myself. That child has been harassing me since we boarded. I saw everything, Jackson stated, adjusting his hold slightly when Harold tried to squirm. Every word, every action. I'm trained to observe and report with precision. Harold sneered despite his compromised position. And who exactly are you supposed to be? Navy SEAL, 20 years service. For combat tours. Specialized in hostage rescue and threat neutralization. Jackson recited his credentials without emotion, but the effect on the surrounding passengers was immediate, a ripple of murmurs and wide eyes. Of course, Harold scoffed. A military thug using excessive force. The courts will love that. The words triggered a flashback for Jackson, a mission in Afghanistan where his team had been accused of excessive force after preventing a child trafficking operation. The mission had been classified, the accusations had been false, but the memory of being painted as the villain for doing what was right still stung. I used exactly the force necessary to neutralize a threat to a child, Jackson replied evenly. No more, no less. The law allows for reasonable intervention to prevent harm to others. Michelle approached cautiously with the first aid kit, handing it to Tiana. I'm so sorry, Dr. Williams. I should have. I didn't think you would. You stood by and did nothing, Tiana said coldly as she extracted gauze pads for Zara's nose. Everyone did. Except him, Michelle nodded toward Jackson, guilt evident in her expression. Harold, realizing his position was weakening, changed tactics. That child was being aggressive. I felt threatened. A large black child charging at me, she's 7 years old and weighs 50 pounds, Jackson interrupted, tightening his hold just enough to make Harold gasp. I recommend you stop talking now. The airline will be hearing from my attorneys, Harold threatened. My family built half of downtown Chicago. We donate millions to political campaigns. When I'm done, none of you will ever work again. The announcement system crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a security incident, we are making an unscheduled landing in Denver. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Law enforcement will be meeting our aircraft. A collective groan rose from the cabin as passengers contemplated missed connections and delayed plans. Several glared at Tiana and Zara as if they were responsible for the inconvenience. This is your fault, one businessman in row 4 muttered loudly enough to be heard. Some people always have to make a scene. Do you stand with Jackson for taking immediate action to protect little Zara, or should he have waited for the flight crew to handle the situation? Comment number 1 if you believe Jackson did the right thing by physically restraining Harold after he struck Zara. Like this video if you would have done the same thing in his position, and don't forget to subscribe to see what happens when this plane lands in Denver with police waiting. What do you think will happen when Harold's powerful connections discover he's been restrained by a Navy SEAL? Will the airline side with the wealthy businessman or the injured child? The plane touched down at Denver International Airport with a jarring thud that seemed to punctuate the tension in the cabin. Jackson maintained his hold on Harold throughout the landing, adjusting only enough to ensure both their seatbelts were properly fastened. The businessman had grown quiet during the descent, a calculating look replacing his earlier rage. All passengers please remain seated, the captain announced as they taxied to a remote part of the tarmac rather than a regular gate. Law enforcement will be boarding momentarily. Through the windows, passengers could see police vehicles with flashing lights positioned around the aircraft. The scene had all the hallmarks of a major security incident. "This is completely unnecessary," Harold muttered, finding his voice again. "A waste of police resources and taxpayer money." "A child has a facial injury caused by an adult," Jackson replied evenly. "That's a felony assault in most states." Tiana sat across the aisle, still cradling Zara, who had finally stopped crying and now rested in exhausted silence against her mother's chest. The bleeding had stopped, but angry bruising had begun to appear across the child's delicate features. "The police are here," Michelle announced unnecessarily as uniformed officers boarded through the forward door. 2 Denver police officers and an air marshal entered the cabin, quickly assessing the situation. "What's going on here?" the lead officer asked, his hand resting instinctively on his holster as he noted Jackson's restrained hold on Harold. "This military extremist attacked me without provocation," Harold declared before anyone else could speak. "I've been held against my will and threatened." Jackson didn't release his hold but nodded respectfully to the officers. "Navy SEAL, 20 years service. This man twice assaulted that child over there. The second time with a closed fist, causing visible injury. I restrained him to prevent further violence." The officer's eyes moved to Zara's bruised face, then back to Harold. "That's not what happened," Harold insisted, his voice taking on the practiced indignation of someone accustomed to rewriting narratives. "There was an accident with a beverage. The child became hysterical and had a nosebleed. This man used it as an excuse to assault me." "Sir, I'm going to need you to release him," the air marshal said to Jackson. "We'll take it from here." Jackson complied immediately, stepping back with his hands visible. Harold made a show of rubbing his shoulder and adjusting his rumpled suit. "I want this man arrested for assault and battery," Harold demanded, pointing at Jackson. "And I want my attorney contacted immediately." "Anyone else witness what happened?" the lead officer asked the cabin at large. This was the moment of truth, the point where bystanders could correct their earlier silence. Jackson watched as passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Would they speak up now, or would Harold's obvious wealth and connections intimidate them into continued silence? "I saw everything," a woman in her 60s spoke up from row 3. "That man hit the little girl. Twice. The second time was a punch. I recorded part of it," another passenger added, holding up his phone. "After the first hit, I started filming." "Me too," said another, and another. Harold's expression soured as he realized the tide of witnesses was turning against him. "Those recordings were made without my consent. They're inadmissible. There's no expectation of privacy on a commercial aircraft, sir," the air marshal informed him. "Check the plane's security cameras," Harold demanded, changing tactics. "They'll show these people are lying. Most commercial aircraft don't have internal security cameras, sir," the lead officer said. "But we'll take statements from everyone involved." Michelle stepped forward hesitantly. "I should. I need to report what I saw." Harold fixed her with a cold stare. "Remember your employment situation before you speak, young lady." The implied threat hung in the air, but Michelle straightened her spine. "He hit the child. I saw it clearly both times." "This is absurd," Harold protested. "I'm being railroaded because of reverse racism. They're targeting me because I'm a successful white businessman." The officers ignored his outburst and approached Tiana. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" Tiana recounted the events with clinical precision, her medical training evident in how she described Zara's injuries. The first strike was open-handed. The second was a closed fist to her face with sufficient force to cause immediate bleeding and what will likely be significant bruising. "She's exaggerating," Harold cut in. "I barely touched the child." "Sir, I need you to be quiet while we gather statements," the lead officer warned. Jackson used this moment to access his phone. During the confrontation, he had activated a recording app, a habit from his military days when documentation could mean the difference between a medal and a court-martial. "Officers, I have audio of the entire interaction, starting from when he first complained about sitting near them." Harold paled visibly. "You recorded me without consent? That's illegal." "Colorado is a one-party consent state," the air marshal noted. "If he was part of the conversation, he can legally record it." The officers reviewed the footage on multiple phones, including Jackson's audio recording. With each passing minute, Harold's position deteriorated. The evidence was overwhelming. "Harold Whitfield, you're under arrest for assault on a minor and battery," the lead officer finally announced. "You have the right to remain silent. This is outrageous." Harold exploded as handcuffs were applied. "Do you know who I am? I'm Executive Vice President at Westridge Financial. We manage pension funds for half the police departments in this country." The name drop caused a momentary hesitation in the officers' movements, the invisible power of wealth and connections making itself felt, but they continued the arrest procedure. "My attorney will have me out in an hour," Harold threatened as he was escorted down the aisle. "And then the real consequences will begin for all of you." As Harold was removed from the aircraft, the captain announced that all passengers would need to deplane in Denver for statements. A chorus of groans and complaints followed. "Thanks for ruining everyone's day," a businessman muttered to Tiana as he passed their row. In the terminal, airline representatives distributed food vouchers and rebooking information. Tiana and Zara were escorted to a private room where paramedics examined the child's injuries. Jackson was separated for his own statement but insisted on staying within sight of the mother and daughter. "You're going to need protection," he told Tiana when they had a moment alone. "Men like Whitfield don't take public humiliation well." "Protection? You think he'd come after us?" Tiana asked, glancing worriedly at Zara who was being distracted by a kind-hearted paramedic. "Not personally. But he'll use his resources to make your life difficult," Jackson explained. "I've seen his type before." As if on cue, an airline manager approached them with a tense smile. "Dr. Williams? On behalf of SkyMax Airlines, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the incident today. We've arranged hotel accommodations for you and your daughter until we can get you on tomorrow's flight to San Francisco." "Thank you," Tiana said wearily. "Also, the company would like to offer these as a gesture of goodwill." He handed her an envelope containing vouchers for future flights. "We hope this doesn't dissuade you from flying with us again." Jackson raised an eyebrow at the paltry offering, vouchers in exchange for a child's trauma and physical injury. "Mr. Whitfield was right about one thing," the manager added in a lower voice. "He does have connections to our executive team. They've asked me to convey that if this incident could be resolved quickly and quietly, the airline would be very grateful." Tiana stared at him in disbelief. "My 7-year-old daughter was punched in the face by one of your first-class passengers, and you're asking me to keep quiet about it?" The manager backpedaled quickly. "Not at all, Dr. Williams. We just hope to avoid unnecessary publicity while the legal process takes its course." "I think you should leave now," Jackson suggested to the manager, his tone making it clear this wasn't really a suggestion. After the manager retreated, Tiana's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then ended the call with a shaking hand. "What is it?" Jackson asked. "That was the Denver police. Harold Whitfield has already been released on bail," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "He made one phone call from the station, and 20 minutes later, he walked out." "That fast? Even for someone with connections, that's impressive," Jackson noted grimly. "They said he's been ordered to stay away from us, but..." Tiana looked at her daughter with naked fear in her eyes. As they were checking into the airport hotel an hour later, Tiana received another call, this one from a private number. Her face grew progressively paler as she listened. "Who was that?" Jackson asked when she hung up. Someone who didn't identify themselves, Tiana said quietly so Zara wouldn't hear. They said if I pursue charges against Harold Whitfield, they'll make sure I lose my medical license for pattern of instability and false accusations. They knew details about my custody arrangement with Zara's father. They knew where my mother lives in Atlanta. Her voice broke. How could they know all that so quickly? Jackson's expression darkened. This confirmed his suspicions about Whitfield's reach. Don't delete that call. It's evidence of witness intimidation. What am I supposed to do? I can't risk my career or my daughter's safety, Tiana whispered. You're not in this alone anymore, Jackson assured her. He pulled out his phone and made a call of his own. Devon. Jackson Miller. I need a favor. Remember that situation in Kandahar when you said you owed me one? I'm calling it in. Over the next hour, Jackson's phone buzzed continuously with incoming messages. As a Navy SEAL, he had connections of his own, brothers in arms who understood that the battle for justice sometimes continued on home soil. Who's Devon? Tiana asked as Jackson reviewed the information flowing into his phone. Former SEAL, now works in digital security, Jackson explained. He's looking into Harold Whitfield and Westridge Financial. Why are you doing all this for us? Tiana asked, genuine confusion in her exhausted eyes. You don't even know us. Jackson was silent for a moment, watching Zara who had finally fallen asleep on the hotel bed, her small face discolored with bruising. Because 20 years ago, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't look away when someone abuses power to hurt the vulnerable. Not in war zones, and not at home. His phone buzzed again. Jackson read the message, his expression hardening. What is it? Tiana asked. Harold Whitfield has a history, Jackson said grimly. Devon found 3 separate incidents settled with non-disclosure agreements. All involving allegations of assault, all quietly buried with money and connections. He looked up at Tiana, determination in his eyes. This ends now. Dawn broke over Denver as Tiana sat by the hotel window, watching Zara sleep. The child's face was a watercolor of purple and yellow bruises, a stark reminder of yesterday's violence. Outside, rain pattered against the glass, matching Tiana's somber mood. She hadn't slept. How could she, when a wealthy stranger had demonstrated such frightening ability to threaten her family and career within hours? A gentle knock at the door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Jackson holding a tray of coffee and breakfast. She let him in, grateful for his continued presence. Any news? She asked as he set down the food. Plenty, Jackson replied, his voice low to avoid waking Zara. I spent the night doing reconnaissance. In military parlance, reconnaissance typically involved gathering intelligence in hostile territory. The fact that Jackson used this term for investigating a businessman spoke volumes about how he viewed the situation. Westridge Financial isn't just any investment firm, Jackson explained, pulling out his phone to show Tiana what he discovered. They're a major airline investor with an 8% stake in SkyMax. That's why the airline manager was so eager to buy your silence with vouchers. Tiana's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the coffee cup. That explains the pressure from the airline, but not how someone got my personal information so quickly. That's where it gets interesting, Jackson said, swiping to another screen. Westridge has a subsidiary called Nexus Security Solutions that specializes in information acquisition. They have contracts with several airlines for passenger profile enhancement. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning they can access your entire digital footprint from the moment you book a ticket, Jackson explained. Your medical credentials, family connections, financial status, all available to them within minutes. Tiana set down her coffee, suddenly feeling ill. So when Harold realized who I was, he likely had your information before the plane even took off, Jackson confirmed. The threatening call you received was no coincidence. It was calculated intimidation based on harvested data. On the bed, Zara stirred and whimpered in her sleep, her small hand rising to touch her bruised face. Tiana rushed to soothe her, murmuring gentle reassurances until the child settled again. She had nightmares all night, Tiana whispered, returning to Jackson. She keeps asking why the man hated her so much. Jackson's jaw tightened. As a combat veteran, he'd witnessed countless acts of violence, but few things affected him as deeply as harm to children. How's her physical condition? The bruising looks worse than yesterday, but that's normal with facial injuries, Tiana replied, her medical training evident in her assessment. No signs of concussion or orbital fracture, thankfully. Jackson nodded, then hesitated before sharing his next discovery. There's more. Devon found a pattern of similar incidents involving Whitfield. 3 settlements with non-disclosure agreements in the past 5 years, all following allegations of assault. All children? Tiana asked, horror creeping into her voice. No. 2 flight attendants and 1 hotel concierge. All people in service positions who supposedly disrespected him. All people of color. Jackson's expression darkened. The NDAs were ironclad, with severe financial penalties for speaking out. And the victims agreed to this? When the alternative is career destruction and legal bankruptcy? Most people can't afford to fight someone with Whitfield's resources, Jackson explained. The system is designed to make silence the only practical option. Before Tiana could respond, her phone rang, another unknown number. She answered hesitantly, putting it on speaker. Dr. Williams, a formal voice inquired. This is Carlton Hayes, Chief of Surgery at Grady Memorial. I understand there was an incident on your flight yesterday. Tiana's back straightened instinctively at her supervisor's voice. Yes, sir. A passenger assaulted my daughter. We had to divert to Denver. There was an uncomfortable pause before Hayes continued. I've received some concerning calls about your behavior, Tiana. Allegations of you provoking a conflict, using racial accusations to cover for your daughter's misbehavior. What? Tiana gasped. That's completely false. My daughter was punched in the face by a grown man. There are multiple witnesses and recordings. I understand, Hayes said, his tone indicating he didn't entirely believe her. However, the hospital board is concerned about potential negative publicity. The person who contacted us has significant influence with several board members and major donors. Whitfield got to your hospital already, Jackson muttered, shaking his head in disgust. Who was that? Hayes asked sharply. Do you have someone listening to our conversation? A friend who's helping us, Tiana replied, shooting Jackson an apologetic glance. Sir, I have documented injuries to my child and multiple witness statements. This isn't a matter of interpretation. Nevertheless, Hayes continued stiffly, the board suggests you consider resolving this matter quickly and quietly. Your upcoming review for department head could be affected by how this plays out in the media. After ending the call, Tiana sat in stunned silence. He's threatening my career now. How is this happening so quickly? Men like Whitfield have spent decades building networks of influence, Jackson explained. One call activates an entire system designed to protect power and privilege. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jackson motioned for Tiana to stay back while he checked the peephole. Instead of another threat, they found a Denver police detective, Maria Gonzalez, according to her identification. Dr. Williams? I'd like to speak with you about yesterday's incident, Detective Gonzalez said, her sharp eyes taking in Jackson's protective stance. And you are? Jackson Miller. Friend of the family, he replied, not entirely untruthfully given how quickly they'd been bonded by crisis. Detective Gonzalez seemed skeptical but didn't press the issue. I'm investigating the assault on your daughter. I understand Mr. Whitfield has already been released on bail. Less than an hour after arrest, Tiana confirmed bitterly. That's unusually fast, even for someone with resources, Gonzalez noted, her tone suggesting professional displeasure. I wanted to check if you've experienced any contact from Mr. Whitfield or his associates since then. Tiana described the threatening call and the pressure from her hospital. Gonzalez took detailed notes, her expression growing increasingly concerned. This fits a pattern we've been tracking, she admitted. Several assault cases involving influential perpetrators have been systematically buried in the past year. Victims intimidated, evidence disappearing from police databases, witnesses suddenly changing statements. You think there's a larger conspiracy? Jackson asked, immediately alert to this new information. I think wealth buys a lot of protection, Gonzalez replied carefully. And I think corporations have become very efficient at making problems disappear. As if to prove her point, Tiana's phone chimed with an email notification. She read it silently, her face draining of color. What now? Jackson asked. It's from SkyMax Airline's legal department, Tiana said hollowly. They're offering a settlement, $50,000 in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and dropping all claims against the airline and any other parties involved in the regrettable incident. Gonzalez sighed. And there it is. The system at work. This isn't just about money, Jackson said, connecting the dots. Whitfield's trying to establish a pattern. If you take the settlement and sign the NDA, it becomes another buried incident. His behavior continues unchecked. On the bed, Zara finally woke up, rubbing her eyes carefully around the bruised areas. Mommy? My face still hurts. I know, baby, Tiana said, moving to comfort her daughter. Detective Gonzalez is here to help us. Zara's eyes widened with fear. Is the bad man coming back? No, sweetheart, Gonzalez assured her gently. He can't come near you again. But the child's fear was evident in how she clung to her mother, in how her eyes darted nervously toward the door. The psychological impact of the assault was written in her body language, a new wariness about the world and its safety. I want to go home, Zara whispered. I don't like it here. The simple statement crystallized the impossible position Tiana found herself in. Fighting would mean prolonging her daughter's trauma and potentially sacrificing her career. Accepting the settlement would mean allowing injustice to continue unchallenged. Jackson watched the internal struggle play across Tiana's face. He recognized it well, the same calculation he'd had to make in war zones when principle collided with practicality. There might be another option, he said finally. If this is part of a pattern, then other victims might be willing to break their silence if they knew they weren't alone. The NDAs have severe penalties, Gonzalez reminded him. Only if the disclosures are made public, Jackson countered. But what if they spoke confidentially to law enforcement about a pattern of criminal behavior? NDAs can't legally prevent reporting crimes. For the first time since the assault, a glimmer of hope appeared in Tiana's eyes. You think we could find others willing to come forward? With the right approach, Jackson nodded. My team specializes in extracting people from seemingly impossible situations. Your team? Gonzalez raised an eyebrow. Jackson met her gaze steadily. Former Navy SEALs with specialized skills in intelligence gathering and strategic operations. All legal, he added, though his tone suggested they occasionally operated in gray areas when necessary. I don't want to know details, Gonzalez decided, standing to leave. But if evidence of a pattern of criminal behavior happened to find its way to my desk, I would be obligated to investigate. After the detective departed, Tiana turned to Jackson. Is this really possible? Going against someone with Whitfield's resources? Jackson's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He read it, then looked up with grim satisfaction. Devon just identified 2 more incidents involving Whitfield. Different airlines, similar patterns, all buried with NDAs. He pocketed his phone with determination. Yes, it's possible. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. I have a medical conference presentation in 3 days, Tiana said, reality crashing back. Zara needs stability, not more trauma. I understand, Jackson said. But ask yourself this, if you accept the settlement and the NDA, what happens to the next child Whitfield encounters? The next woman? The next person he decides doesn't belong in his space? The question hung between them, heavy with moral weight. Zara's small voice broke the silence. Mommy, did I do something wrong on the plane? No, baby, Tiana answered immediately, gathering her daughter close. You did nothing wrong. Then why did that man hurt me? The innocent question, the fundamental plea for the world to make sense, solidified Tiana's resolve. Because he's done it before and nobody stopped him, she answered honestly. But this time is different. She looked up at Jackson, determination replacing fear in her eyes. What do we need to do first? The Denver hotel conference room wasn't designed for strategic operations, but Jackson Miller had conducted mission planning in far worse conditions. Maps and documents covered the table while 3 laptops displayed different streams of information. In the 36 hours since Harold Whitfield's assault on Zara, a resistance had formed. Devens confirmed 5 previous incidents, Jackson explained to the small group gathered around the table. 3 covered by NDAs, 2 never reported due to intimidation. Devin Harris, a former SEAL with cybersecurity expertise, nodded in agreement. His fingers moved constantly across his keyboard, digging through digital records. Whitfield's got a system. Incident occurs, Westridge Financial's crisis team deploys, witnesses are identified and neutralized, victims are offered settlements with strict NDAs, and all evidence disappears. Tiana studied the pattern board they'd created. And the airlines just go along with this? Westridge owns significant stakes in 3 major carriers, explained Layla Cabrera, a former military intelligence officer Jackson had called in. They leverage their investor status to pressure compliance. Employees who don't play ball find themselves terminated for unrelated reasons. Detective Gonzalez, who had returned in an unofficial capacity, shook her head in disgust. The system's designed to protect wealth and power, not justice. In the adjoining hotel room, Zara sat with Jackson's former teammate Rick Taylor, a gentle giant who had served as the SEAL team's medic. Despite his intimidating size, Rick had a natural way with children. He was teaching Zara breathing techniques disguised as a game. Okay, little warrior, breathe in for 4 counts like you're filling your power tank, Rick instructed, demonstrating the deep breath. Hold for 4 counts to store the power, then release for 4 counts to send your strength throughout your body. Zara followed his instructions, giggling despite her still bruised face. It tickles in my tummy. That's your power growing, Rick assured her with a wink. These are special Navy SEAL breathing tricks that help us stay calm when things get scary. Through the connecting door, Tiana watched this interaction with gratitude. While the physical bruises on her daughter's face were healing, the psychological trauma remained. Zara had awakened screaming twice during the night, convinced the bad man was coming back to hurt her. The hotel phone rang, startling everyone. Jackson answered cautiously, listened for a moment, then hung up with a troubled expression. Front desk. There's a courier with a delivery for Dr. Williams. Layla immediately moved to the window, scanning the street below. Could be surveillance. I'll check it out. Minutes later, she returned with a sealed legal envelope. After checking it for anything suspicious, she handed it to Tiana. Inside was a formal letter from Westridge Financial's legal team. The language was polished and professional, but the message was clear: if Tiana proceeded with charges against Harold Whitfield, they would pursue countercharges alleging she had fabricated the incident for financial gain. They cited multiple witnesses willing to testify that Zara had been disruptive and aggressive throughout the flight. They're rewriting reality, Tiana said, her voice hollow as she passed the letter to Jackson. Standard intimidation tactic, he replied after scanning the document. But notice they've increased the settlement offer to $200,000. They're getting nervous, Devon noted without looking up from his computer. They wouldn't quadruple the offer if they weren't concerned. A ping from Devon's laptop drew everyone's attention. Got something. Email exchange between Whitfield and SkyMax's VP of Security discussing passenger incident management protocols. Essentially a playbook for handling situations exactly like this. How did you access that? Detective Gonzalez asked, then immediately raised her hand. Never mind. I don't want to know. Let's just say there are whistleblowers inside SkyMax who aren't comfortable with covering up assaults, Devon replied cryptically. Jackson's phone buzzed with a notification. A video had been posted to social media showing the aftermath of Whitfield's assault on Zara. Though it didn't capture the punch itself, it clearly showed the child's bloodied face and Whitfield's aggressive behavior afterward. It's trending, Jackson noted with grim satisfaction. #Justice for Zara is gaining traction. Tiana's phone rang next, the hospital again. This time, she put it on speaker for everyone to hear. Tiana, it's Hayes again. The board is extremely concerned about this social media situation. Mr. Whitfield's attorneys have contacted us directly, threatening legal action against the hospital for your defamatory campaign. I haven't posted anything, Tiana protested. Nevertheless, this is becoming a significant liability issue. I'm afraid we need to place you on administrative leave pending resolution. The call ended with Tiana staring at the phone in disbelief. He just suspended me. My entire career. They're isolating you, Jackson explained, recognizing the tactic from his military days. Cut off support systems, create financial pressure, force capitulation. We need to accelerate, Devon announced, looking up from his screen. Whitfield knows we're gathering information. He started scrubbing digital records. Too late, Layla said with a satisfied smile, holding up a flash drive. We've already copied everything. A gentle knock at the connecting door preceded Rick poking his head in. Someone needs her mom, he said softly. Tiana immediately went to the adjoining room where Zara sat on the bed, looking small and vulnerable. What's wrong, baby? I drew a picture, Zara said, holding up a crayon drawing. Rick said it might help me feel better. The drawing showed crude stick figures on what was clearly an airplane. A large figure with an angry red face stood over a small figure with brown skin. Red crayon marks streaked from the small figure's face. In the background, another figure stood with what appeared to be a superhero cape. That's the bad man, Zara explained, pointing to the angry figure. And that's me when he hurt me. Her finger moved to the caped figure. And that's Mr. Jackson coming to help. The simple drawing, with its raw emotional content, hit Tiana harder than any medical report or legal document. This was how her 7-year-old now saw the world, a place where bad men could hurt you without reason, where safety depended on superheroes intervening. Can I keep this? Tiana asked, her voice thick with emotion. I think it might help other people understand what happened. Zara nodded solemnly. Rick says sometimes pictures tell stories better than words. When Tiana returned to the conference room, she placed the drawing in the center of the table. This is why we're fighting, she said simply. Jackson studied the child's drawing, his expression hardening. As a SEAL, he'd been trained to compartmentalize emotion, to function even when surrounded by horror. But certain things cut through that training, the vulnerability of children chief among them. Devon, what's our timeline look like? He asked, refocusing on the mission. Whistleblower from Michelle's flight attendant union is willing to talk. Says this isn't the first time the airline has pressured crew to alter statements about passenger incidents. We need more than just our case, Detective Gonzalez cautioned. To establish a pattern of behavior that would override the NDAs, we need multiple victims willing to come forward. Working on it, Layla replied. I've identified 3 of the previous victims. One's already agreed to speak confidentially. Jackson's phone rang, an unlisted number he recognized from his military days. He stepped away to take the call, speaking in low tones before returning to the group with renewed purpose. "That was Commander Wilson from Navy Intelligence," he announced. "Apparently, Westridge Financial handles investments for several military pension funds. They're concerned about potential ethical violations and have opened an internal review." "The military's getting involved?" Tiana asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time. "Not officially," Jackson clarified. "But they're creating pressure from another direction. Whitfield may have political connections, but the Pentagon has its own influence." A notification chimed on multiple devices simultaneously. Someone had leaked internal SkyMax emails discussing the Whitfield situation to a major news network. The story was breaking nationally. "That wasn't us," Devon said, looking up in surprise. "Looks like we're not the only ones tired of the cover-ups," Layla observed. Over the next several hours, the Resistance's strategy took shape. Devon continued mining digital records while Layla coordinated with other victims willing to speak. Detective Gonzalez prepared to receive their evidence through official channels. Rick worked with Zara, helping her process her trauma through art and child-friendly exercises adapted from military resilience training. Throughout it all, Jackson remained the comm center, directing their efforts with the precision and focus that had made him an elite SEAL. For him, this was another mission, different terrain, different adversary, but the same fundamental objective: protect the vulnerable from those who abused power. That evening, as their impromptu command center quieted, Tiana found Jackson standing alone by the window, watching the Denver skyline. "Thank you," she said simply, joining him. "I would have given up without you." Jackson shook his head. "No, you wouldn't have. You're a fighter." "How can you be so sure?" Tiana asked. "You barely know me." "I've spent 20 years evaluating people under pressure," Jackson replied. "When Whitfield hit Zara the first time, you didn't cower or plead. You stood your ground." He turned to face her fully. "That's not someone who gives up." Their eyes met in the darkened window reflection, an unspoken connection forming between two people thrust together by crisis but finding unexpected strength in each other. The moment was interrupted by Devon's excited voice. "Got it." Whitfield's entire pattern exposed. 6 incidents over 3 years, all following the same playbook. As they gathered around Devon's laptop, Jackson allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The tide was turning. Whitfield had built his system of intimidation and cover-ups on the assumption that isolated victims wouldn't have the resources or courage to fight back. He hadn't counted on them finding each other, or having a Navy SEAL on their side. "Tomorrow," Jackson told the team, "we take this public." The Denver County Courthouse buzzed with unusual activity for a preliminary hearing. Media trucks lined the street outside, reporters jostling for position near the entrance. Inside Courtroom 3, every seat was filled, a mix of journalists, legal observers, and curious public drawn by the viral story of a wealthy executive punching a child on an airplane. Tiana sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture perfect despite her exhaustion. Beside her, a prosecutor from the district attorney's office arranged documents with methodical precision. Jackson sat directly behind them in the first row of the gallery, flanked by Devon and Layla. Their presence formed a protective barrier between Tiana and the crowded courtroom. The defense table told its own story of power and privilege. Harold Whitfield sat surrounded by 3 attorneys from Preston and Holcomb, one of the nation's most expensive law firms. His silver hair was freshly cut, his navy suit impeccably tailored to project respectability and authority. To a casual observer, he looked incapable of the violence described in the charges. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Evelyn Martinez entered the courtroom. Known for her no-nonsense approach and strict adherence to procedural fairness, Judge Martinez represented both opportunity and risk for Tiana's case. After the formal opening, Harold's lead attorney, James Preston, immediately filed a motion to dismiss all charges. "Your Honor," This case represents a profound miscarriage of justice, Preston began, his voice resonating with practiced conviction. Mr. Whitfield, a respected businessman and philanthropist, has been subjected to a coordinated campaign of defamation based on a minor misunderstanding during air travel. Preston painted a picture of Harold as the true victim, a distinguished executive who had simply defended himself against an unruly child after being provoked with spilled beverages and invasions of personal space. He characterized Tiana as an opportunist seeking financial gain and media attention. Furthermore, Preston continued, Mr. Whitfield has been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion through an orchestrated social media campaign designed to prejudice any potential legal proceedings. Jackson observed Harold during his attorney's presentation. The businessman maintained a somber, dignified expression, occasionally shaking his head slightly at particularly egregious accusations as if pained by such misrepresentation. It was a masterful performance of injured innocence. When the prosecutor rose to respond, her approach offered stark contrast. Your Honor, the facts in this case are straightforward and supported by substantial evidence. Mr. Whitfield struck a 7-year-old child not once, but twice, the second time with a closed fist with sufficient force to cause bleeding and bruising. She presented the collection of witness statements, photos of Zara's injuries, and video footage captured by passengers. This is not a misunderstanding or a defensive reaction. This is a grown man assaulting a child because he felt entitled to do so. Judge Martinez reviewed the evidence carefully before denying the motion to dismiss. There is sufficient evidence to proceed with the hearing, she ruled, causing Harold to lean over and whisper furiously to his attorneys. What followed was a carefully choreographed legal battle. The defense called character witnesses who testified to Harold's charitable works and business acumen. Former employees described his mentorship and leadership. A psychologist suggested Harold might have acted instinctively due to a perceived threat, activating a fight-or-flight response. Mr. Whitfield has no history of violence, Preston emphasized repeatedly. This isolated incident, if it occurred as alleged, would be completely out of character. When Michelle the flight attendant was called to testify, Harold's attorneys attempted to portray her as unreliable and biased. Isn't it true that you're currently involved in a labor dispute with SkyMax Airlines? Preston asked, attempting to undermine her credibility. That has nothing to do with what I witnessed, Michelle replied, her voice steadier than it had been on the airplane. And isn't it also true that you initially reported the incident as a minor disturbance rather than an assault? Preston pressed. Michelle hesitated, then squared her shoulders. I was instructed by my supervisor to minimize the incident in my report. I was told Mr. Whitfield was a high-value passenger, whose comfort should be prioritized. This unexpected admission sent murmurs through the courtroom. Judge Martinez called for order before allowing Michelle to continue. I've been a flight attendant for 12 years, Michelle said, her voice gaining strength. I've seen passengers from all walks of life. What Mr. Whitfield did was not a misunderstanding or self-defense. He deliberately struck a child because he was angry and believed he could get away with it. Preston attempted to discredit Michelle by suggesting she was seeking publicity or financial gain, but her testimony remained consistent. When he finished his cross-examination, she addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, I nearly lost my job for speaking up today. But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent about what happened to that little girl. The defense strategy shifted as the hearing progressed, focusing increasingly on portraying Jackson as a dangerous vigilante with a history of violence. They introduced his military record, emphasizing combat deployments and suggesting he had overreacted due to PTSD. Mr. Miller restrained my client with excessive force, Preston argued. His military conditioning caused him to escalate a minor situation into a physical confrontation. When Jackson took the stand, he presented a striking contrast to the defense's characterization. In a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, he spoke with quiet confidence and precision, answering only what was asked without volunteering additional information, the discipline of his military training evident in his testimony. Mr. Miller, Did you physically restrain Mr. Whitfield on the aircraft? The prosecutor asked. Yes, Jackson replied simply. Why did you take that action? I observed Mr. Whitfield strike a child with a closed fist with sufficient force to cause immediate bleeding. I assessed him as an active threat to the child and other passengers. Did you use excessive force in restraining him? No. I used a standard restraint hold designed to immobilize without causing injury. Mr. Whitfield sustained no physical damage from my intervention. Preston's cross-examination attempted to provoke an emotional response, suggesting Jackson had a hero complex or was looking for threats where none existed. Isn't it true that your military experience has conditioned you to see violence as a solution? Preston asked. My military experience taught me to protect civilians from harm, Jackson replied evenly. It also taught me precise threat assessment and appropriate use of force. So you appointed yourself judge and jury on that aircraft? No, sir. I witnessed a felony assault on a child and acted to prevent further harm, as any responsible citizen should. When Tiana took the stand, she balanced professional composure with maternal emotion. As a surgeon accustomed to high-pressure situations, she recounted the events with clinical precision, but her voice broke when describing Zara's injuries and ongoing nightmares. My daughter asks me every night if the bad man can find us, Tiana testified. She's afraid to fly again. She's afraid of men in suits. The most dramatic moment came when Harold himself took the stand. Initially, he presented as calm and reasonable, expressing regret for a situation that got out of hand. He claimed he had merely raised his hand defensively when Zara had lunged toward him repeatedly. I would never intentionally harm a child, he stated firmly. That's not who I am. But as the prosecutor's questioning continued, cracks appeared in his composed facade. When presented with the timeline of events reconstructed from multiple witness statements, Harold became increasingly agitated. These people are lying, he insisted, his voice rising. They've been manipulated by social media outrage and the prospect of lawsuits against a wealthy target. Mr. Whitfield, the prosecutor said calmly, we have 17 witness statements describing you striking Zara Williams with a closed fist. Are you saying all 17 witnesses are lying? They're mistaken, Harold snapped. It was chaotic. People see what they expect to see. We also have video evidence showing the aftermath, including your statement, and I quote, the brat deserved it. How do you explain that? Harold's face flushed with anger. That footage is taken out of context. This entire proceeding is a farce designed to extort money from a successful businessman. As his composure deteriorated, Harold revealed more of his true nature. He complained about special treatment for certain passengers and made thinly veiled references to people who don't know their place. From the gallery, Jackson observed the shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. Judge Martinez's expression had hardened, and several jurors were openly taking notes during Harold's increasingly defensive responses. The final moment of the hearing came when the prosecutor introduced a surprise piece of evidence, a sealed deposition from another of Harold's victims who had broken her NDA to testify about a similar assault 2 years earlier. Objection! Preston shouted, rising to his feet. This is completely inadmissible and prejudicial. While the attorneys argued legal points, Harold's gaze swept the courtroom until he locked eyes with Jackson in the gallery. For a brief moment, the mask of respectability dropped completely, revealing naked hatred and rage. Jackson met his stare evenly, neither challenging nor backing down, simply witnessing. Judge Martinez ruled that portions of the deposition could be considered relevant to establishing pattern of behavior. As the damning testimony was read aloud, Harold leaned forward to whisper something to his attorney. Whatever was said caused Preston to stiffen visibly. Harold abruptly stood, ignoring his attorney's attempt to restrain him. This is a conspiracy, he announced to the courtroom. I will not be railroaded by this mob mentality. Mr. Whitfield, you will be seated or held in contempt, Judge Martinez warned. Instead of complying, Harold's gaze fixed on Tiana. "You think you've won? You have no idea who you're dealing with," he snarled, his refined mask completely abandoned. "I'll make sure you never practice medicine again. I'll take everything you have." As court officers moved to restrain him, Harold lunged toward the plaintiff's table where Tiana sat. His face contorted with rage as he reached toward her, shouting incoherently. Jackson was in motion before the court officers could fully react, inserting himself between Harold and Tiana with the swift precision that had kept him alive through combat deployments. He didn't strike or grab Harold, simply positioned his body as a physical barrier, hands raised non-threateningly but ready to defend if necessary. "Stand down," Jackson said quietly, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to high-stakes confrontations. "You're only making it worse for yourself." Court officers converged, restraining Harold as Judge Martinez banged her gavel repeatedly. "Remove Mr. Whitfield from my courtroom immediately. He will be held in contempt." As Harold was escorted out, still shouting threats, the courtroom erupted in chaos. Journalists rushed for the exits to file breaking stories while legal observers murmured among themselves about the unprecedented scene. Judge Martinez called for order. "This court will recess for 1 hour," she announced. "When we reconvene, I will issue my ruling on whether this case will proceed to full trial." In the hallway outside, Tiana found herself surrounded by Jackson's team, their protective formation keeping reporters and curious onlookers at bay. "Are you okay?" Jackson asked, his usual stoic expression softened with genuine concern. "I think so," Tiana replied, her hands still trembling from the confrontation. "But his face, he looked like he truly wanted to hurt me." "He did," Jackson confirmed grimly. "Men like Whitfield can't handle losing control. When their power is challenged, they often resort to physical intimidation." "Do you think the judge saw what happened?" Tiana asked. Jackson nodded. "Everyone saw. Whitfield just confirmed every allegation against him more effectively than any witness testimony could have." When court reconvened, the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Judge Martinez's expression was severe as she addressed the room. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely witnessed such disturbing behavior from a defendant," she began. "Mr. Whitfield's actions today have given this court significant insight into his character and temperament." She reviewed the evidence methodically before delivering her decision. "Based on the testimony presented and the behavior observed in this courtroom, I find probable cause to bind over all charges against Harold Whitfield for trial. Additionally, I am ordering a psychiatric evaluation and revoking bail based on the demonstrated threat to public safety." Preston attempted to object, but Judge Martinez cut him off. "Counsel, your client's behavior speaks for itself. This court will not be party to intimidation tactics." As the hearing concluded, media representatives swarmed outside the courthouse. The story had transcended a simple assault case to become a symbol of wealth, privilege and accountability. Tiana faced the cameras briefly, Jackson standing supportively at her side. "Today isn't about victory," she stated. "It's about acknowledging that no one, regardless of wealth or status, has the right to harm a child. My daughter deserves justice, and so do all the others who have been silenced." 6 months after the courthouse confrontation, Tiana stood at a podium in the SkyMax Airlines corporate headquarters. Behind her, a banner proclaimed the launch of the Safe Skies Initiative, a comprehensive anti-discrimination training program for all airline staff. Beside her stood Michelle, now promoted to flight attendant supervisor and tasked with implementing the new protocols. "No passenger should ever feel unsafe because of their race, gender, age, or appearance," Tiana addressed the assembled media and airline executives. "And no employee should ever feel pressured to ignore harassment or assault to protect a company's relationship with high-value customers." The journey to this moment had been arduous. Harold Whitfield's courthouse meltdown had catalyzed a series of revelations and consequences that rippled through multiple institutions. The criminal trial had resulted in his conviction on charges of assault on a minor, with additional charges of witness intimidation and perjury. His 18-month sentence was less than many felt he deserved, but the true punishment came in the form of public disgrace and professional ruin. Westridge Financial had distanced itself from its former executive, conducting an internal investigation that uncovered multiple ethics violations. The passenger incident management protocols that had enabled cover-ups were exposed and dismantled. 3 airlines had revised their policies on reporting passenger misconduct. Most significantly, victims of similar incidents had found their voices, breaking through the culture of silence that had protected powerful abusers. For Tiana, the aftermath had brought unexpected developments. After her suspension, colleagues at Grady Memorial had rallied to her defense, forcing the hospital board to reinstate her with a public apology. Her presentation at the San Francisco Medical Conference, delayed but not cancelled, had received international attention, securing funding for her pediatric surgical innovation. As she concluded her remarks at the airline event, Tiana introduced her foundation for children affected by trauma. The Zara Williams Foundation will provide therapeutic support and advocacy for young victims of violence and discrimination, she explained. Because healing requires more than just physical recovery, it requires restoring a child's sense of safety and justice in the world. In the audience, Zara sat between Jackson and Rick, applauding her mother's speech. At 8 years old, she still carried the memory of that terrible day on the airplane, but the sharp edges of trauma had begun to soften through therapy, support, and her own remarkable resilience. Art therapy had proven particularly effective. Zara's initial crude drawings of the bad man had evolved over months into more complex expressions of her experience. Her latest piece, prominently displayed at the Foundation's first fundraiser, showed an airplane where diverse passengers stood together against a single angry figure. Even in a child's simple rendering, the message was clear: community standing against hatred. After the formal presentation, Jackson approached Tiana with a rare smile. "You were right to reject the settlement offer," he said. "This impact wouldn't have been possible if you'd signed that NDA." "I couldn't have done it without you," Tiana replied, briefly touching his arm, a gesture that had become familiar between them over months of shared purpose. Their relationship had developed gradually, built on mutual respect and the unique bond formed through crisis. Jackson had remained in Denver long after his tactical expertise was needed, finding unexpected purpose in helping establish the Foundation's security protocols and mentorship program for at-risk youth. "Have you given any more thought to my offer?" Tiana asked, referring to the Foundation's proposed Director of Security position, a role Jackson was uniquely qualified to fill. "Still considering it," he replied, though his expression suggested the decision was already made. After 20 years of military service protecting American interests abroad, the prospect of protecting vulnerable children at home held profound appeal. Their conversation was interrupted by Rick calling them over to where Zara was showing something to a small group of children, other young victims of trauma who had been invited to the event. She held Hoppy, her beloved stuffed rabbit, now mended and wearing a tiny medal around its neck. "This is my brave bunny," Zara explained to the children. "He got hurt too, but Mr. Jackson's friend fixed him and made him stronger." Jackson watched as Zara demonstrated how the repaired rabbit now sat upright on its own, a small engineering enhancement Rick had added during the mending process. The children reached out to touch it with expressions of wonder, finding connection through the shared language of recovered treasures. Later that evening, a small celebration took place in Tiana's new Denver apartment. The Foundation team, including Jackson, Devin, Layla, Rick, and Detective Gonzalez, now a board member, gathered to commemorate both the launch and the one-year anniversary of the flight that had brought them together. "I have something for you," Zara announced solemnly, presenting Jackson with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a child's drawing in a simple frame, her original airplane scene, but with an addition. The caped figure she had drawn to represent Jackson now had a speech bubble containing wobbly letters, "You are safe now." Jackson, a man trained to remain composed in the most harrowing combat situations, found himself momentarily unable to speak. He knelt to Zara's level, meeting her eyes with genuine emotion. Thank you. This is the best gift I've ever received. Mommy says you helped us because that's what heroes do, Zara said. But I think you were sad too, and helping us made you feel better. The simple insight, a child's perception cutting through adult complexities, struck Jackson with its accuracy. His military career had left him with unresolved questions about power, protection, and purpose. In standing up for Zara and Tiana, he had found answers he hadn't known he was seeking. As the evening progressed, conversation turned to the broader impacts of their case. Multiple corporations have revised their approaches to handling misconduct allegations. Legislation had been introduced addressing confidentiality agreements in assault cases. A social media movement had emerged around #SpokenNotSilenced, encouraging victims to report incidents despite intimidation. It's remarkable how much changed because one person refused to be silenced, Detective Gonzalez observed, raising her glass toward Tiana. Because many people refused to be silenced, Tiana corrected, acknowledging everyone in the room. One voice can be dismissed. Many voices become a movement. 1 year after the incident, Zara boarded another airplane, this time bound for a foundation event in Chicago. As she settled into her seat, Jackson noticed her small shoulders tense slightly, a shadow of memory passing across her face. Remember your power breathing, he reminded her gently, demonstrating the technique Rick had taught her. Zara nodded, taking a deep breath. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, she recited, completing the exercise. With each breath, her posture relaxed incrementally. A flight attendant approached, recognizing Tiana from media coverage. Dr. Williams. We're honored to have you and Zara on board today. Your foundation's training program has changed how we approach passenger safety. Tiana smiled, acknowledging the comment with grace that had become her hallmark in public appearances. Thank you for implementing it. Every small change matters. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Zara looked out the window with the returning wonder of childhood, fear giving way to curiosity and excitement. Mommy, will we go above the clouds again? Yes, baby. We'll go so high you might even see angels, Tiana replied, echoing their exchange from that first fateful flight. Beside them, Jackson observed the moment with quiet satisfaction. In his 20 years as a SEAL, he had measured success in objectives achieved and threats neutralized. Now he measured it differently, in a child's recovered sense of wonder, in systems reformed, in justice served not through violence but through persistence and solidarity. The ultimate measure came later that month, when Zara gave a short speech at an elementary school assembly about standing up to bullies. With poise remarkable for an 8-year-old, she concluded with words that encapsulated everything their journey had been about. Sometimes bad things happen even when you didn't do anything wrong. But you don't have to face the bad things alone. There are always brave people who will stand up for you if you just tell your story. And when brave people stand together, even the scariest bullies can't win. As applause filled the auditorium, Tiana and Jackson exchanged a glance of shared pride. The incident on the airplane had begun with hatred and violence, but its legacy had become something neither could have imagined, a foundation for change, a community of advocates, and perhaps most importantly, a child who had learned that justice, while not guaranteed, was always worth fighting for. What would you have done if you witnessed someone like Harold Whitfield assaulting a child? Would you have stayed silent like most passengers, or would you have taken action like Jackson? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who need to hear this message about standing up against discrimination and protecting the vulnerable. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories. Thank you for watching, and remember, one moment of courage can change many lives. This powerful story teaches us that standing up against racial discrimination requires both courage and community. When Harold attacked little Zara, most passengers chose silence over action, showing how privilege and power thrive on bystander apathy. Jackson's intervention reminds us that one person's courage can break this cycle, but lasting change demands collective action. True justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoers, it's about transforming broken systems. Tiana's refusal to accept hush money meant more victims could find their voices. By rejecting an easy settlement, she chose a harder path that ultimately created protection for countless others. The story also demonstrates how wealth and connections often shield perpetrators from consequences, creating separate justice systems based on status. Harold's immediate bail release, the airline's attempt to buy silence, and the hospital's pressure on Tiana reveal how deeply these protective systems operate. Perhaps most importantly, Zara's journey teaches us that healing from racial trauma requires both acknowledgement of harm and active community support. Her transformation from fearful victim to empowered speaker shows that with proper support, even profound trauma can become a source of strength and positive change.